living longer, living healthier, living better than ever before. Welcome to Mountain Pacific's Healthy Living for Life, a weekly series that gives you the information, education, and expert insight you need to become an active participant in today's ever-changing healthcare climate. Here now is today's program host.
If you are one of the many people who took a break from the workforce and now you are looking to get back to your career or even start a new one, today's episode is for you. While job hunting can certainly be intimidating, today we're going to talk about why it doesn't have to be. Welcome to Healthy Living for Life, a show dedicated to helping you do just that. I'm your host, Beth Brown, and today we have tips for getting back to work. Stay with us. Welcome back to Healthy Living for Life. Joining us first today is Wendy Legursky, who is a Women, Infants, and Children Program, or WIC technician, and she has some personal experience with what it's like to return to the workforce. And thanks so much for being with us today, Wendy.
Sure.
So let's go ahead and dive in and learn a little bit about your experience. So you took some time off, and then you tried to go out job hunting again. Can you just talk a little bit about what happened there and your time off and getting back into it?
Sure. Right. So my decision to retire from a full-time position was unexpected. I had expected to just work continuously through retirement. However, my father started to experience some severe health issues. He had a terminal illness, and then some dementia issues started to really make it very difficult for he and my mom to live alone and for her to care for him. So because I was at a point in my life where I could put family first, I did decide to resign from that position temporarily to help them. So that wound up being almost a year and a half, was the time that I was not employed outside the home. And I would absolutely do it again. It was very worthwhile. But it did make it interesting when it was time to return to work. It was very different than any job searching I had done in my past.
So before having to jump back into this most recent job search, when was the last time that you had to go out there and hunt down a job?
So it was 11 years ago. I was well under 50. So some of the concerns and issues that I encountered this time were very different. I had been in the same job for 10 years. So I'd not had any recent job hunting experience, and it definitely was different this time around.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about that. What was difficult about trying to get back into the job search and back into the workforce?
So one of the things that I think was difficult for me was my perception of myself as a professional person who had, worked my way up, through my current position to a more of a leadership role. I think we all, grow in our work as we age, and we have different positions. We're promoted. So I think emotionally and my self-perception were really barriers at first, because I felt like a 21-year-old that was going out asking for a job, and it was a very different feeling from within. Obviously, other things had also changed in over a decade. The fact that many positions were now advertised online, and that the whole process of inquiring and applying was more centered online rather than in-person contacts. That was a change. That was something to adapt to. But I do think for anyone else who's over 50, has been out of the workforce and decides to return, I just really want to encourage people to have a lot of positive self-talk and really don't allow yourself to stay intimidated by the barriers you perceive for yourself, because your experience is so valuable to employers. And, I think as mature adults, we've been through a lot of situations personally and professionally, and have done a lot of problem solving. And same thing goes with a job search on re-entering the workforce. You will figure it out. You do have a lot to offer. And so I just want to encourage people to not let their own self-perceptions be a big problem.
Okay, that's great advice. So it sounds like maybe things were a little bit different with recruiters or employers because you were over the age of 50. Can you speak to that?
Well, I think mostly it was the process. I guess for myself, I was very comfortable with in-person contacts, job interviews, because over the years you develop confidence and you develop those skills. And so one of the things that was a little interesting is your first contact with a prospective employer, this now was not in person. It was often by submitting documents online and then possibly setting up a remote interview. And so really in terms of making a first impression, I feel like it was very important that those cover letters, those resumes, those applications were really polished because you didn't have the advantage of an in-person contact to supplement what was being submitted in an application.
Okay. Was there anything that you did or found that you thought was especially helpful in your job search?
I think, yes. I think doing a lot of research and not just trying to wing it, even if that has worked for you in the past. Be excited about learning about what works. There's so many wonderful resources online now. Most communities have local resources for job seekers. And so I think just being willing to try to refresh your own information and learn what is effective now compared to what it may have been at an earlier stage in your career. I think that's really important. And also I think that sometimes older adults like myself, we value humility. I think that we're taught if you work hard, you'll climb up the ladder, your work should speak for itself. And so sometimes I feel that older adults may not be as confident in highlighting their attributes and their experience. And I just want to say, be confident. You may need help to identify your strengths and your skills. And that help is there. But I think it's just so important to be positive, know that you have a lot to offer. And yes, it may take numerous interviews to find the right fit, but when you do, it will be a win-win for you and for the new employer.
Awesome. Yeah. So it sounds like be an advocate for yourself out there.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you, Wendy. We're out of time, but that was a lot of really great information. Thanks for sharing your experience.
Thank you.
And we'll take a break here for just a couple minutes, but when we come back, we're going to have some tips and advice about getting back out there and searching for a job when you're over the age of 50. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. Joining us now is Steve Ryder, who is the Senior Operations Specialist with AARP Montana, and we sure appreciate you being on with us, Steve.
My pleasure, Beth. It's really good to be here again.
Well, we're happy to have you. So let's go ahead and jump in. But first, before we do that, maybe you should talk to us a little bit about your role at AARP Montana so people know who you are.
Sure. I have worked with AARP for a little over 30 years, and for the majority of that time, I was a project director for a program called the Senior Community Service Employment Program. And my function was to help people who were 55 and over find employment. Prior to that, I spent 5 years with the Human Resource Development Council in Billings, also in employment programs. So I have well over 30 years of experience in helping people find employment. Right now, my job in AARP Montana is to do outreach for veterans and American Indians, as well as the operations part of the job for the state of Montana.
Well, that's great. And it sounds like you're going to have some great information to share with us today. So, when you talk about real estate, we say it's either a buyer's market or a seller's market. When we look at sort of the landscape of job searching right now, is there such a thing as it being an employer's market or an employee's market? Is it friendlier to one or the other?
Well, right now is, I think in my lifetime anyway, is unprecedented as far as the employment outlooks are for employees. This is definitely an employee market. You can't drive down any main street in Montana and throw a stick without seeing a help wanted sign someplace. There are always articles out there saying that we're increasing our starting salary to entice employees to apply for that particular business. So definitely an employee's market.
Okay, great. And COVID-19, as we know, has changed so much about our lives and the way we do things day to day. Has it had any ripple effects on jobs and job searching and on employment?
Well, I believe almost everybody has heard this catchphrase now called the Great Resignation in what they are describing our market today. And that is absolutely due to COVID. People are afraid, or were. I think things are loosening up a little bit better. But working in an atmosphere where you're confronted with people all of the time, a lot of people decided that they would rather forego their employment for the time being rather than have a greater opportunity of contracting COVID. So I think that definitely plays a part in it.
Sure. I'm sure there are lots of reasons why people will leave the workforce and then be looking to come back. We talked to Wendy before the break, and she left to be a caregiver and spend some time with her family. What are some of the common stories or reasons that you hear as to why people leave and then need to come back?
Sure. Probably the number one reason would be they need the money. People often retire and find out that the retirement income just doesn't cut it for their expenses, so they'll need to supplement their income. However, there are a lot of other reasons that people want to return to the workforce. Socialization is one of those reasons. Isolation can be a real problem with not only people 50 plus, but with all people. And the workplace is a really good place to have interaction, socialization with people. I think people are looking for purpose. I want something that I can feel good about when I come home at the end of the day. So a lot of people are looking for that as well in their decision to return to work.
So in your experience, Steve, to that end, are people going back to the same profession they had before, or are they looking for something new?
It's a really interesting question. I read a fascinating statistic the other day that was with a temporary employment agency, did a survey with employers, and they found that 20% of recent retirees have been asked by their previous employer to return to work. But again, I think it has to do with, is it a fulfilling job for me? So if I'm going to return to the same work that I've always done, it has to be fulfilling. I believe most people want a different job after they retire, something that may not be as high pressure or high stressed as corporate America. They may be looking for something that is, again, more fulfilling for them, possibly part-time, possibly in the nonprofit world, or even something they can do at home, work from home. Okay. So I think people generally do want to change careers.
We have a little less than a minute left, and I know that trying to change careers, get back into the job hunting, that can be a little bit intimidating. Do you hear common concerns from folks?
Well, sure. It is intimidating. It's kind of like relearning how to ride that bicycle, getting back out there again and putting your foot into the market again is a little bit scary. But I think people should feel a lot more comfortable about it right now because it is an employee-friendly market. Employers are looking at different ways that they can entice, encourage people to come to work for them, and also ways that they can make that job more fulfilling for that position. There was a recent job fair that the Chamber of Commerce put on for people returning to work, and I happened to go to that, and there were over 80 potential employee employees or who are retirees who attended that in Helena.
Wow.
Very impressive. And there was a number of employers there as well talking about the opportunities they have. So if you're looking or you consider to get back and dip your foot in that pool again, go for it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Steve. We do need to pause here for a quick break. But if
All
you
right.
are looking to get back, one of the things you're definitely going to have to think about is that resume. And now so many of those are online. So we're going to have some tips for building an online resume. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthy Living for Life. We're still talking with Steve Ryder from AARP Montana. And now, Steve, we're going to talk about building a resume for getting back into the workforce after being gone for a while. Is it a good idea to talk about the gap that you have because you took a break from the workforce, or how do you address that on your resume?
Well, again, thank you for having me here today, Beth.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate that. And, that's always been the age-old question in resumes, how to overcome gaps. And that's been, from everybody who spent time in prison to homemakers to people that just decided to retire early and then re-enter. How do I explain my gaps? And that's where a functional resume comes in rather than a chronological resume, where you just highlight the employment that you've done in the past that specifically addresses the skills and the abilities to do so. So for most people re-entering the workforce, I would recommend that you do a functional resume.
Okay, that's great advice. And so for someone who needs help with that resume, are there resources where they can turn?
Sure, there certainly are. But before I go into that, I would like to state something about resumes, because I have a little different viewpoint on resumes that most people don't necessarily share. So a resume is only good for one thing, and that is to get job interviews. If you're starting to receive job interviews with your resume is perfect, no matter how much you pay somebody to prepare for it. So I would always advise people, do not pay a lot of money to have somebody prepare a resume for you. Simply let the proof be in the pudding. In other words, are you getting interviews with your resume? And if you are, you've got a good resume. There are a lot of different places where you can get free resources to help prepare your resume, including AARP. AARP has a very robust employment website at aarp.org, and you can actually get somebody to actually look at and give you an opinion on your resume. So again, I'd like to encourage people, don't spend a lot of money on resume preparation.
Okay, that's great. And that makes a lot of sense to me, Steve. It's all about trying to get in for that interview. How big of a role do you think volunteerism plays? Should people include that on their resume?
Oh, absolutely, especially if it is similar to the kind of work that you're looking for. You want to put down those skills and abilities that match with the job that you're applying for. Use words that the employer has in their job description. So if they ask in the job descriptions for somebody who's dependable and flexible, those are things that you would want to point out in your resume or your cover letter. And don't ever underestimate the value of the cover letter. I've known a lot of employers over the past who have actually thrown out resumes if that person does not include a personalized cover letter. One other quick tip about resumes, make sure you personalize it to that employer. Don't send out mass resumes. Those almost always end up in file 13.
Okay, good to know. So another one that someone might not know whether to include, a lot of people left to be a caregiver, either maybe to grandchildren or to an elderly parent. Do you include those kind of skills on a resume?
Again, it would depend. If mainly what I would do is if they relate to the type of job that you're applying for, absolutely include those skills. If they don't and you're worried about having that as a gap in your employment, that's something that you would mention in the interview, is that the reason I have this large gap is I was a caregiver for my mother or my spouse or my child or whomever that may be.
Okay.
But yeah, try to match what that employer is looking for with the skills wherever you can pull them from, whether that be volunteering, past employment, doing work at your church, anything of that nature.
Okay, great. So let's move on from the resume and talk about next steps. So people have submitted their applications, their resumes, their cover letters. Now what?
Oh gosh. Now get ready for the interview, hopefully, and do follow up. It doesn't hurt to call that employer and say something along the lines of, "Hi, my name is Steve Ryder. I submitted a resume to you about a week ago, and I'm just calling to see if you had a chance to take a look at it." If they say yes, jump in. May I come in for an interview? Don't be afraid to be bold. Don't be afraid to ask for what you want. What can they do? They can say no, right?
Yeah.
But what is that? What difference is that from them ignoring you and not getting back to you?
That's great.
So follow up on all of the jobs that, in particular, that you're interested in.
Okay. How internet savvy do you have to be to job hunt these days?
Gosh, that is a really good question, because a lot of employers do advertise strictly through the internet, and their application process is through that, and you may have to scan your resume and submit it to them. There are search engines that employers utilize that have catchphrases that will either weed out or move forward applications or resumes. So it's very helpful. Now, where can you get these skills? You can always go to, there are a number of places in Montana, Job Service being one of those, where you can go and always get help in filling out applications, whether it be internet, whether it be in hand or whatever. But there's resources out there available to you to help you learn that, as well as I mentioned earlier, AARP has those resources available.
Perfect.
So don't be afraid to ask.
Okay, great, Steve. That's all the time we have. It flew by, but you had so much great information. Thank you so very much.
My pleasure. Happy to come back anytime.
Okay, well, be careful what you say, but thanks. We might take you up on that. And thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you'll come back and see us again next week. Until then, stay fit, stay well, and stay healthy for life with Healthy Living for Life. Have a great week. We'll see you next weekend.
Healthy Living for Life is brought to you by Mountain Pacific Quality Health in partnership with AARP Montana. We'd love to hear from you. If you have suggestions for future programs, visit our website at mpqhf.org or call us at 406-443-4020. You can also catch us on YouTube by visiting our website and clicking on the Healthy Living for Life logo. Production facilities provided by Video Express Productions.